Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Dave Frincke, and I'm the movement leader for United Adoration, here with Rachel Wilhelm, who oversees all of our work in the United States. And we're really excited today to be hanging out with the guys behind Yellowhammer Hymns. And we have Chuck and Andy. Guys, thank you so much for being with us. And Rachel, do you just want to introduce Chuck and Andy for us a little bit, and then we'll get to chat.
Yeah. I know Chuck and Andy from eons ago, back in 2010. Chuck was my pastor at Church of the Ascension in Arlington, Virginia. Such a great guy to work with. I wrote some songs with him, and they're near and dear to my heart, those songs. I still sing them. And Chuck developed a culture of songwriting between music director and pastor, and it's a beautiful, beautiful culture, and he continues to do that today with his present music director at his church, Christ Church Presbyterian in Jacksonville, Florida. Andy is a friend of mine too, and he was on my music team at Ascension in Arlington, and I got to know him and have sung with him a lot, and I'm a huge fan of his music in general. And so I'm so excited to talk to the two of you about Yellowhammer Hymns, and I'm stoked about this album just because it's gorgeous. It's a real great contribution to the church as a whole, and I just love this relationship between the pastor and the artist in residence at the church and music director. This collaboration going on. So I think at UA, because we care so much about that kind of collaboration, especially between artists and their pastors, we want to display that to everybody so that everyone can see what that looks like. And we have some pointed questions for you too. But how did the two of you meet? I know how you two met, but you can elaborate a little more for us.
Yeah, so like you said, we all met in DC, Arlington, Virginia, at Church of the Ascension, which is a church that Chuck planted. I'll let him talk about that. But I met both of you in 2010 when my wife and I were visiting after quite a long break from church, and we were very taken with and drawn into the liturgical worship experience. And as an artist, I was particularly encouraged by the way that music was used during the service in a very purposeful and I thought more meditative way, and not in the way I experienced before, which I won't, yammer on about. But basically, it was more of in sort of an entertainment format, and which is what led me to say I need a break from this, and that was for a long time. But I just remember sitting in actually, it was a Presbyterian church that we used, Church of the Ascension, Christ Church Presbyterian of Arlington, wasn't it? Full circle going on. But so I just remember sitting in the pew and just thinking, this is what we've been looking for, and it wasn't blurry and confusing to me. Like my situation before, after a few months, I hesitantly said, "If you ever need somebody to play guitar, let me know. I'm not going to lead anything."
Andy,
I'll sing some harmony, and Rachel, let me just speak about Rachel's, because she won't do this herself, is extremely talented in her own right, and isn't that painting behind you the cover of one of your isn't that the cover of your EP?
Yeah, The
flower.
rose on the side. Yeah.
So I mean, just really fun to sing harmony with, and kind of relearn some old hymns that I'd sung, visiting my grandparents' churches in Iowa and Minnesota, both Lutheran churches, and singing songs like "And Can It Be," and and just relearning hymnody.
That's cool.
And Chuck has vast knowledge of that as well, and we developed a friendship, and like Rachel said, he had written some songs with Rachel, and he sent me some lyrics he'd been working on, and I'll let him talk about that.
Yeah, I was in those early days there was a whole lot of trial and error, and not everything was good. It's been a pretty humble process, and Rachel and I had worked on something and turned it in, and it got utterly rejected, but our church loved it. and it was great. And then I was doing some theological writing, and decided that in order to demonstrate that I really had this down, I wanted to put it in the most condensed form, so a poem seemed most appropriate. And so those were the words I sent over to Andy. Those were the words behind Christ Our King. And so Andy ripped off a demo real quick, and then that thing actually went missing for about 6 months, and went through this strange process. Then we pulled it back out. And we're like, oh, this is really great, and we did something with it. So all of them have a curious history, especially those early days. But yeah, I mean, we all just were developing relationships over those years, and we have been planted out of a church family that had a really rich musical culture, and there were a lot of creative artists around. Wendell Kimbrough was around, Laura Waters Henson, and that was what initially had attracted me there. And so the culture that was created was just a really fertile one, and honestly kind of awakened some of those kind of latent desires for me. So that's where it's been so beneficial to be around artists for me, because I'm not particularly, I'm not Mr. Musical, you would say. I sing horribly. I'm really loud.
No, you do sing really loud.
Really loud. So, but all the way back into those days, and then just, continuing to work and continuing to explore has been a lot of fun. And Andy and Rachel both were a big part of that journey. I mean, they've taken the journey with me. So
that's cool. What already is striking me about your story is this idea of Chuck. You had this text you were working on. Well, why was it so important to you to reach out in the artistic realm to see that, to see something more happen with that text? I know you said you wanted to see how simple it could make it or something like that, but what kind of drove you to reach out to in the artistic community in that way?
That's a great question. One of the things that I noted a long time ago was reading Augustine's Confessions. This will sound super nerdy, but it's incredibly intellectual work, but it's a prayer, and there's beauty to it, and there's rhetoric, and he was obviously highly trained. And then, but that struck a chord in me, that there were certain things I read inside of Augustine that I could have read in a systematic theology text that made more sense coming from Augustine, just because he poetically described things. I remember there's one line where he's talking about his sin. He said, we're bound by the chains of our own making. And I was like, oh, that's so much more beautiful than, reading about total depravity. And so things like that were striking me back in the early days of, oh, there's power there. I can't say I knew, exactly what to do with that at first. And but I was learning, I was growing on that front. And then I've always been a John Newton fan. I was reading biographies about him, and he wrote a ton of hymns, and a lot of them were trash. There's a whole collection called Only Hymns, and most of them never saw the light of day. But, he's one of the most epic hymn writers that we have, just the ones that have stood the test of time. So it started to occur to me, this is good for a pastor to be engaged, and
Mm.
and how to get it in poetic form. And my stuff really early was really wooden, sometimes still really is really wooden. Andy has to give it life, and so I mean it's been fun, it's been a challenge, but hymns have a certain power to them that, with that truth kind of translated there, it comes to expression where it's memorable in a way that a sermon never is, and so that's what gets me, and just being engaged with, really services being an entire experience, not just about the sermon. My theological tribe tends to be heavily indebted to just the idea of the sermon, and so rounding that out, with the prayers. That's all a hymn is a sung prayer, and bringing that all together has been a lot of fun. And when you can complement what's going on in the teaching and the liturgy with really great songs that have that same kind of density or even theme, there's a lot of great stuff that happens. So anyway, that's where it's basically coming from.
I think it's pretty amazing. Something that I've always really appreciated about you, Chuck, is that you're willing to take a risk, and especially with the songwriting thing. Not a lot of pastors that don't have that experience of writing on a regular basis, writing music or having any musical bone in their bodies, don't go, take that step forward and say, hey, I have this text, do you mind putting a tune to it? I mean, that's not a usual occurrence. And I think that more pastors should do that, and should step out like that. And I think it would be really encouraging for pastors that are watching this or listening to our podcast to hear that you just took a risk and it turned into something really cool and beautiful. So my next question to you guys is what does your writing and collaboration look like? How, the kind of the nuts and bolts, and what's your process? Just speak on that.
Yeah, well, and I think it's starting to take more shape. There is no one set process. Obviously, it is an artistic endeavor, but there are certain commonalities to the pattern now. But I think I've had, some different ideas. I live in the Psalms and then reflect, broader theologically. So always bringing those into that theological conversation where it's happening in other places of the Bible. So I'll scratch down some ideas, and sometimes very early on, before we have anything clear, I'll just say, hey, Andy, this line, putting these words together. Yeah. And that often triggers something for him. Sometimes we just have a word, one verse, sometimes we have three.
Right.
So they've all been a bit different. One of them was even something I'd written back in 2016 before Andy had arrived. I'd sent it to him, and he couldn't come up with the tune.
It didn't really, and that doesn't reflect my feeling about his words. It was just kind of I didn't hear anything yet.
Yeah.
So I think, we have an initial idea, and then we do sit down and talk about, hey, here's the concept theologically, where we'd like to go. So there is a lot of information that's kind of off the cut, that is never on the page. We have a long list of scripture references, and we talk about, hey, what's the mood of this? What are we trying to achieve liturgically? And so those conversations are really fun. Those are actually some of the most life-giving, part of the creative session.
Right.
Andy goes away, sometimes has a dream. All kinds of stuff happens.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to confess that as a Presbyterian. But
you can with us. It's okay. It's just us.
But then we come back, and that's oftentimes where the real creativity starts on the word front, because when you have a tune, you can really start to beat it into shape and bring out some other things. Mm-hmm. So it is this very free-flowing process, from my side.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's like Chuck said. He'll have a verse, or maybe just what he thinks might be this is the theme, and then and for a couple of them I've asked where are you drawing from, what psalm in particular, like for so I've been here since end of July 2018. One of the first ones we started working on together was that one he sent the lyrics to, At the Mountain of God, wasn't it, that you sent me in 2016? And which is from, is it Psalm 95?
That one is like Isaiah 25,
right? Okay.
And Psalm 14. Yeah.
So he had a lot of those lyrics were written, and then I looked at them and kind of saw them new and heard something, and I thought, this looks like a barn burner of a gospel song. So and I thought, well, At the Mountain of God, that's a chorus. There's a chorus in there. So and it's difficult to articulate kind of where the melodies come from, but you just kind of have a feeling and you just go with it. And
Yeah.
but so one of the things that's been fun for me and new writing these kinds of songs is that I need to think about, well, what key can the congregation sing in?
Yep.
And it's probably a couple steps down from the key I would sing it in, but we want children who are 8 and men and women who are in their 80s to be able to sing these songs, which is,
and the pastor.
Yes, and the pastor. So we sing them in keys that everyone can sing in, and which is a song like a hymn like Be Thou My Vision in the key of C. Most people are going to be able to sing that. I might have some trouble with the lower notes there in the key of C, but that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build melodies and arrangements that people can participate in, and we don't want to confuse these with. They're not for performance. These are for people to participate in.
Yeah.
And that's a different kind of songwriting. We're doing this collaboration is about that kind of songwriting.
Yeah.
So collaboration is hard anyway, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it requires great humility, but also boldness at the same time. But you guys also have this whole other layer of complexity to your collaboration, and that's the idea of pastor and a worship leader. In a sense, pastors are given this, an assignment to lead a congregation, to see the overall vision. But then you're in the weeds with the artistic community collaborating together. Andy, what is that a weird dynamic? Did it take some getting used to? How have you learned to relate to Chuck as my pastor, but also as my, co-writer?
Yeah, it's, I've released a lot of music that's for self-expression, and this is a different kind of process for me, but one that I enjoy, and it's just a parallel path. Have these songs for self-expression and these songs we want people to express something together. And so using the Psalms as a lyrical template and trying to draw out those emotions that we can all express together with the text, with the melody. I feel pretty confident on the melodic side and the musical arrangement side, but not especially confident on the lyrical side and then on the side of the text, and that's Chuck's strength. So that collaboration, it's something that we've been learning the past almost 2 years now, and I think it's unique, but it's also something that doesn't have to be. I think it can happen in more churches, and probably is happening in places that we haven't heard about yet. But it's not. It's different, but it's also not foreign. I love to write songs. I've been writing them for a long time, and so I just like to make music. So this was something, actually, when we started doing this, I thought, okay, this is I understand this. This is something I can do, as whereas before, when I first got here and I had to direct a choir, I'd never done that before, and I thought, well, I guess we'll figure this out, so and talk about taking a risk. Chuck took one with me, so
Yeah.
I
Well,
told you.
Yeah. No, and I think, Andy and I are both over 40 now, and so have had enough like bruises and batterings through
Yeah.
life where it's been nice because it's, your ego's not quite as fragile, but yet we're both fairly confident people in our respective kind of realms. And so, he's been able to let me down softly several times,
That's very nice of you, Andy.
and I mean, it
What
is
a
great.
pastors sound nice.
Because we really have to be honest. Like, I just have to say sometimes, like, hey, that's a little too singer-songwriting. It's too opaque,
Yeah.
not clear enough.
Mhm.
And he has to say, hey, that's so wooden. Nobody's ever going to connect that. and that's okay. And it is hard because all these things are ultimately, you've worked on them. You've crafted it. You cherish it to some degree. And to let it go, it just takes a lot of trust.
Yeah.
But that's been a fun part of
Yeah.
it as well. We have a fun team, and
Yeah.
they're supportive. They like to laugh. They'll
Mhm.
they'll listen to it and say, "Hey,
Yeah.
that's awesome," even if we're
Right.
kind of like,
Yeah.
not sure yet.
Aw.
And
So-
I love that.
So maybe a question for both of you is like, what's one of the biggest lessons you've learned, like Andy, about collaborating with a pastor?
Mm.
And then Chuck, what's one of the biggest lessons you learned about collaborating with a worship leader?
I would just say one of the biggest lessons is that these songs are ours. They're not mine. They're not this isn't my. It's another gear, I guess, that I didn't know that I had to learn how to use. And it's beautiful in a different way. And I really I'm finding there's a lot more landscape in that I haven't explored yet in this kind of songwriting. And to hear a group of people sing something that we've written together, we're proud of that. We're that's really fulfilling, and it's because it's not mine. It's just a different kind of writing than me playing a club and singing these songs that are really just about for self-expression, and I really enjoy that. But this is something different, and I think the biggest lesson for me in this is that it's not purely for my expression, and to focus on those things that I mentioned earlier. Make different melodic choices so that these songs can be teachable, so that they can be singable, and focus on a tempo. And there's one song that actually, and I won't take away from the story, but Chuck wrote he wrote the melody and the words. I'll let him talk about that.
What?
Yeah, and
One of those non-Presbyterian things I can't talk about.
yeah, and
Did you whistle it, Chuck?
no, he sent me a voicemail. Yeah. But I'd recorded that one, and Chuck thought, well, we want people to sing this. The tempo needs to change here, and so we changed the tempo. That's if that was just something that I was doing on my own, I would think, well, that's just how we recorded it, and we're gonna stay with that. But the purpose of this particular song is people to engage with us, not just for them to reflect and listen. So it's kind of a rambling answer there, Dave, but
That's
hopefully
great.
you heard what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
I think I could go a bunch of ways in answering that question. I think one of the things I see as a pastor, for your staff or your musician or your children's minister, really, I mean, it applies to everybody, but the pastor does have to really work to create a good culture, a fertile garden where good things happen. And a lot of that starts with me and my spiritual health and providing good leadership and boundaries and, ideas, but then that they run with and to let people take things further than you could and to not be offended by that or think that it somehow insults your competence. And that's always difficult. I don't know why, but and so our team has been a gift in that, and it's been awesome to let Andy run with things and correct things and help me learn and grow, just because I need that. And and then in church life, obviously, there's always criticism, and people are rough sometimes and they're thoughtless, and a lot of times it's not about the music at all, it's about something else. And I think for the pastor to understand that and to be ready to curb that and to protect their staff, to also be willing to give feedback when they need it, and we've all had to do that with each other, but that itself, you go through that, it creates trust, and it builds up some confidence, and and I think it allows for further good things. That's what we're hoping, Yellowhammer Part Duo.
Yeah, so Chuck, I was going to ask you, just kind of in light of all this, you've sort of answered this, but just specifically, what advice would you give pastors who struggle to understand their music directors, chief musicians, whatever you want to call that?
Yeah, I think obviously relationship's really important. And that's where Andy and I go back. Rachel, we were able to have a good relationship in Washington. I had the same with the director in between Rachel and Andy, and they're all friends, which really helps, in the context, because they are hard conversations when you do have to give critique and feedback. I mean, it's like, hey, you're a little emotionally flat. What's happening? I mean,
Yeah.
And that runs both ways. To the preacher and the liturgist and to the musician, and so I think having relational trust and having enough chips stored up on all sides for everybody to know that we're coming with the best intent. I do think providing a layer of protection, the pastor really needs to do that. Needs to set the tempo that, it normally only takes 2 or 3 conversations in the congregation. If people are complaining and they know that there's not an audience for that, it stops. Just,
Yep.
To say, hey, that's really not welcome to be that harsh. It's not constructive. And I don't really hear that much there is to grow from that. And then sometimes it is distilling down, hey, here's what this person is saying, and then I'll take that back, to our staff or to Andy and just say, hey, here's a tweak that we can make. But I think, kind of playing that role, and and then I think just the whole collaboration idea where you plan services together, and so oftentimes it seems to go one of 2 ways. It goes the direction of the pastor just being completely separate from the planning of the worship service. It's like, no, I'm just the preacher, and or it goes in the direction of he just absolutely controls the snot out of it,
Yeah.
and nothing. There's no really other inputs, and so our liturgy team meets, and that's Andy, and that's the other pastors, and our administrator even, and everybody is involved. As we talk about the service, I'd say, hey, here's kind of a theme, and here's what we've got going on, and here's a song that came to mind, but there may be others, and so it just kind of unfolds, and sometimes it even changes. We do that on Monday. We try to be 2 weeks out. Try. Coronavirus has ruined all things.
Yeah.
But just working collaboratively and partnering and giving people the freedom to have ideas. And sorry, that's the subwoofer in the background.
No problem.
And so, but that's been a really good thing, and things strengthen that way. But also just having regular conversations about these important things, makes it natural. We joke because I force them to listen to me sing. I'm like, oh, what's that hymn? And all I can do is get one line, and
Oh,
He's
that's
great.
awesome. I just think the communication between pastors and worship leaders has been a tough one, I think, historically, for the church, because I think, and those of you who don't know, I used to be worship leader for many years, and now I'm the senior pastor at my church. So I can see both sides of that coin, and I've been on both sides of that fence, and it is a different assignment in the church, but so essential for that communication and that working together to be strong for the health of the congregation and for worship to be pointed in the right direction. So I think it's really great that not only have you guys learned to do that well, but to put out an album like this, and we got a little sneak peek here. Such a beautiful, creative album that I'm very excited for for everyone to hear, and it's coming out in just a couple days, right?
May 8th, this Friday.
May 8th. Wow, it's May already. That's crazy. But one of the things that struck me right away, and we'd love to hear more about the album from your guys' perspective, but I loved I don't know how else to describe it except like the pace of the songs or the hymns. I mean, it's unique and it's refreshing, and it just kind of washed over me as I was listening, especially like one of my favorite Psalms is Psalm 103. I just, I could preach about that all day. I sing it. I just love that Psalm. And of course I gravitated towards that on your album right away. And it was just the lyrical and melodic integration was just beautiful. And I just really appreciated that. So you guys are doing just such a great job. So do you want to chat about that album a little bit? And, first of all, why do you call it hymns and not songs? I think that's a good way to start, right?
Yeah, I think Chuck articulates that really well, and so, but I'll just say that I think it's closer to what we're trying to accomplish. Making this album, it originally wasn't. We didn't set out to make an album. We started writing these pieces of music together, and then we started to sing them in our church, and people started to respond very positively.
And then Andy one day said, "Chuck, we've got 9 songs."
Yeah. Wow.
So
like, oh.
So we recorded in the sanctuary, which you haven't seen, just right next door. We recorded before the renovation happened a year ago almost. We recorded in the sanctuary as live as possible with a really there's an incredibly talented group of people that are part of the music team here that I'm grateful to work with, and they range from high school freshmen to recent retirees, and we've got some people that have played in smoky bars with members of Leonard Skinner and Molly Hatchet, and then some other people that are doctors and really accomplished businessmen that could have gone and been professional musicians, but that's just not what was in store for them. And these are the people that I have been able to work with and record with, and they're not. I mean, they're incredibly talented, but they're not session musicians. And I actually think that it doesn't take away from the music at all. I think it accentuates and humanizes, personalizes. These are ours,
Absolutely.
And for some of these folks, I just said, we're rehearsing, we're not recording, but I hit record because it made them more comfortable, and we got the best take. And also, I will say, we did not auto tune, because if you can't sing on pitch, you shouldn't be. So That's
true.
my personal.
Did you just go there?
He just went there.
He tells me it all the time.
You just opened the auto
But
tune.
I'll tell you another thing. It's what it separates the listener from it separates the listener from you. If you immediately they know, and they not be able to really articulate this, but you listen to a song and you can hear it's been manipulated digitally. You are removed from it.
Yeah.
Something happens. But if you hear somebody sing, and it might be slightly flat or slightly sharp, but they're in a group of people and they're singing they're with all of themselves. I want to hear that 10 times out of more than something that's pitched.
I love that about you, Andy.
That is not how we sound.
Right,
There
exactly.
is no perfection, and that's just, we wanted to bring it as close to what we sound like singing these songs, on Sunday morning. So
there's kind of two metaphors that we joke about a lot, about our music and our church life in general. And one of them is, when we write a hymn, it's like a cargo ship. It's not nimble, it's not sexy, it's not fast, and it doesn't move quickly, but it delivers the goods. It gets the point. It actually has a certain power to it that is, awesome. And then, the other thing we joke about is, we're a craft brewery, that's what we do. We're distilling not broadly dispersed beverages, but for us, we want to handcraft something. We want to work it out in the trench. It's our expression. It's for our congregation, and if it goes beyond that, great. But there's, because we've kind of have stumbled into this, which I think it's very true to say. It's like, hey, our congregation loves it. It's been fun. And now there's a touch of interest outside. So, but that's also really freeing, just to go, hey, we're making something ourselves. There's a great deal of liberty into it. We don't have to answer to anybody. And
it's because and this is what we believe in United Adoration, is that because your goal is to build up and bless your local congregation. Right. And if you're not doing that, then but that's where we start, right? And anything that might have a wider range, but we write it for our people. We write it for the people that we're ministering with, that we're walking with, that we're loving, that we're caring for, and that's what I love about, it's like, oh my gosh, we have songs, we are writing anyway, right, for your congregation, for your people, and using them, and then it just kind of went from there, and I love that about so many of the musicians and songwriters we're talking with and we're meeting, that there's a heart for the local church, and to invest creatively in the local church, and that's what gets us up in the morning. That's what we love, is encouraging that more and more. So that's a really great part of your guys' story and history.
Yeah, well, and one thing on the melodic, thing, that's generally Andy's ballpark. We talk about the what's the mood that we're trying to achieve, and several of them were framed around kind of the church calendar, and it said, hey, Andy, it'd be really awesome if we got a Good Friday, Easter Sunday, something celebrating God's return, and if we've already got an Ascension hymn because we had Christ our King kind of in the bag. And so that was informing it. And that also gave it a certain freedom to take on some emotional range, where several of them are, very triumphant, which they should be, and they're filled with hope. And, he bore our sins as, like a chain gang, and, but there's something eerily kind of, encouraging about it. And I could never explain to you why. But, that was a lot of fun, allowing kind of that liturgical sensibility of the calendar to inform what was happening, and to try to bring good poetry and ideas, theologically to expression, for there to be honesty, but also just celebration. And And several of those songs, last year's in particular, 2019's, we had, particularly difficult year as a church, just with some different challenges that we faced. And it was a really good discipline to say, hey, we're going to write something that grieves. And that's where he bore our sins came from. And then we're going to write something about hope. And there are two. That's Wake Up, O Sleeper, and At the Mountain of God. Because we felt like it was our Christian duty to hope, even though life was really upside down and hard. And so allowing the Psalms themselves to inform how we were handling all that situation spiritually, I mean, it really did impact, because the Psalms of Lament, they end with thanksgiving, and a pledge of that. So that was fun and life-giving, and it's probably why they mean so much to us, I think, because they were really lived. They're from the trench, and just from the rigors of our call. So.
Yeah. Wow.
Love it. So good. So what inspired the name Yellowhammer Hymns? Tell us about that.
I had that same question.
So, in a lot of our conversations, a lot of these songs begin with the Psalms, and that Chuck is reflecting on. And in one of those conversations, Chuck had mentioned Psalm 104, and birds nesting in the cedars of Lebanon. And I just I heard it and I thought, well, there's something there. And we had another name, which was, it was unique to us, but we just, when it came time to release these group of songs, I thought, like Chuck said, we've got an album here somehow. But I'd be remiss not to mention the bank vault that our church had been in for almost a year, a temporary office. The bank vault became this incredible isolation booth, and so I'd like go in there and
panic room
and shut the door.
It's the scream room.
And people could be working out there, and as long as they didn't mind me like noodling on my guitar and singing, I'd record some of this stuff. And like people come in during their lunch break and play some percussion or bass, or off hours, when the staff wasn't there. So it was recording the sanctuary, the bank vault, and in a couple of people's living rooms. But when it came time to say, all right, let's release this, we needed a name. And so I remember that conversation about Psalm 104, and I thought, well, what kind of bird might nest in a cedar of Lebanon? And so I just Googled birds indigenous to Israel. And Yellowhammer is one of the first birds I saw, and then I saw that its call, the first four notes, supposedly inspired Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Now this is actually something that one of his proteges said, but I thought, man, that's pretty cool. And then I was like, Chuck, what do you think about Yellowhammer Hymns? Because I also, you want people to be able to find it in iTunes Music and Spotify and all the social sites, and you need a website, and you needed something that's unique, that's ours. It felt unique to us again. So he thought it was good.
And we all laughed because as we moved out last year, that was May of 2019, the staff all in a group, Lament and Joy, came in and threw some sledgehammers and hammers.
Right.
And as we got everything out, and there were several yellow hammers stuck up in the ceiling and in the walls, and the contractor marveled at it. And so that was not the reason behind it, but it does make us laugh.
Yeah.
So.
Oh man,
that's funny.
Now, did you guys ever actually? I'm trying to think. Did we get to the answer of why you call it hymns and not songs?
I'll let Chuck take that. I think
we started to, and then we might have got sidetracked. I don't know.
I blame myself.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's just we never want to be too pedantic. It's hymns, songs, spiritual songs. Call them what you like.
Sure.
Yeah.
But in general, hymns typically has more of a nod to traditional church music. and we're more in that traditional vein, kind of the measured working through the song. It is the cargo ship. It's built for group participation, which means it doesn't have certain dynamics to it. It's not just for solo performance, which, I love performed things. It's wonderful. But, and we have a couple on the album that lean more that way, and it's great. But, in general, we've been working on hymns. So that's just what we're doing. We mostly sing retuned hymns, old classics, and, that's what we do. And just do them to modern instrumentation. So.
Well, creativity is not bound by style, is it? Creativity can and should, we believe so strongly, flow into every style of worship, whether it's more traditional or liturgical or spontaneous, whatever that is. We just believe so strong in the creative spirit and telling of the beauty and the wonder and the awe of God in your local context for your people. And I think there's so many great examples of chatting with you guys of what you've done in the context in which you're doing it, and that what you've done has been thoughtful, and there's reasons behind it, and that's what's really jumped out at me during these last few minutes, just talking with you guys. That's just hats off to you guys. Great job.
I think it's super inspirational too. I think a lot of pastors and music directors can learn from the two of you, and just be inspired to see what can happen when you work together and collaborate. I know as a songwriter, I'm more of a melodist, and I discovered that I'm more of a melodist by working with Chuck myself, and where Chuck would take a risk and say, "Hey, I have these lyrics. Would you put them to a tune?" And so over the years, I've discovered this about myself. Did we lose him?
Yeah, we lost him.
Oh no!
I don't know what you did to offend them, but it was.
I don't know.
Something.
They left immediately.
Yeah. Right.
So anyway, what I was trying to say, Dave, is that I discovered a lot about myself as a musician and as a church musician and songwriter when I took that risk myself of taking a poem that my pastor wrote and putting a melody to it and going, oh, I'm actually better at doing this than actually writing the whole dang thing. And there's also this amount of trust that comes with that. Trusting my pastor, he should know his theology, right? And so when he's writing something, I have a trust in the fact that he is writing something that is solid and good. And I may not necessarily have the greatest theology. I'm not a pastor. I don't study theology. But there's this great marriage of music and theology that comes together when pastors and church musicians can get together. Not that, church musicians don't have any theological leanings, but for those that don't necessarily have that keen interest, it works out that way,
Well, that's why collaboration is worth it. That's why, being in the weeds together is worth it. And that's why having the relational equity to create together is worth it, because it helps form something better.
Absolutely. Well, the Yellowhammer Hymns album comes out May 8th. We're so excited about it. It's beautiful. We'll share it on our page and everything, so you all can listen to it and have access to it. It'll be on all of the places where you want to find music. So we're very excited, so excited to have Chuck and Andy both on to talk with us about it and the relationship between artist and pastor. So great stuff.
Chuck and Andy, wherever you are, thank you so much for spending time with us. So, and we'll talk to everybody soon. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks.